Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the Africa Theatre Podcast. And today, my guest is Mumbi Kaigwa, one of the most respected and illustrious, if I may say, thespians in Kenya and in East Africa, and a very good friend of mine. Welcome, Mumbi.
Thank you.
So, I'm really thrilled to be here with you, interviewing you after all these years.
Yeah.
And although we know quite a bit about each other, I'd like us to begin at the beginning. Can you tell me a little bit about your childhood, the family, your education, so that people get a sense of who you are and where you started?
Okay. My parents are from Mukurweini in Nyeri County, and they came to Nairobi in the early 50s. And my father had a stall at the city market.
Okay.
And he sold eggs.
Wow.
And my mother was raring to go. And they had a shop in Ofafa Maringo. And I wasn't born there. By the time I was born, it was 1962.
Because you're the last child, aren't you?
I'm the last child, yeah. And so when they came to Nairobi, they lived in Makadara, and then they lived in Bahati, and they lived in Ofafa Maringo. We lived above the shop. And the shop was called Kaigwa General Store. And when the independence was looming, there were people selling up. And so my dad bought a farm in Raraka. And then he went into politics. So I grew up with parents who were pretty much absent.
Okay.
Because they were busy forging a life.
Right.
My dad in politics, my mom working to run the shop, the various shops, and then she became a farmer. Once we moved to this farm, she started to, the farm had cows, a dairy farm, a running dairy farm, and then later on she started to grow crops, and then she also started to she went into pig farming big time, and chickens.
Right, and they were pioneers, African pioneers at that time.
Yeah.
So soon, just before and soon after independence, weren't they?
Yeah, because I think our farm was actually one of the biggest. I remember my mom saying, your father took 3 loans to buy this farm.
Wow.
And a lot of the other farms were in the 20s of acres and tens of acres, but he decided to
go for broke.
To go hard. Play with the big boys.
And that is so far away from you going into theatre.
Well, I the reason why I wanted to say that I sort of grew up in this space that was very, very large, very intimidating in a way, because neighbors were so far away from, your nearest neighbor was so far away.
How large was your farm?
It was over 80 acres.
Okay, yeah.
And because my siblings are much older than I am, they had gone to high school by the time I was finishing primary school. So they were in boarding school. So I pretty much was on my own. So I think that one of the things that then happened was I started to create an interior world.
Okay.
Talking to myself.
Wow, okay.
Which they say is the first sign of madness. So it started pretty early on. And creating characters, playing games with imaginary people.
Friends.
Yeah, imaginary friends. And I think that that's where I recently gave an interview to a magazine, and they were asking me, and I was sort of like mining my just how is it that it actually happened, because of the questions that they were asking, and I think that loneliness and then that need to create something that would occupy me during the day in a space where there weren't matatus, there weren't borders, you couldn't go anywhere.
Right.
Parents had gone out, they weren't coming back until maybe later in the evening. and that kind of being alone meant that I was then in the prime spot for creating stories.
That's really amazing. That's really something. So you started, you created this internal world. You created a world of stories. You created friends because of your isolation.
Yeah.
And then how did that? I know that you first started performing as a child.
Yes.
Right.
I did, yeah.
So what happened? How did that come to be?
It's interesting. The people who I created were all European. Huh?
Okay. As we all did in those days.
Yeah, they all had long hair. They all had a very sort of Western aesthetic. And there was a lot of being very sort of stern. And I think that was from the books that we read. And I think Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie has shown that it seems like it's an African or maybe a story that a lot of people of color might identify with.
Yeah, we were colonized. So, we were colonized properly, and Kenya was a settler colony, which is a very special form of colonialism.
Yeah.
Just a tiny step away from apartheid, actually.
Yeah.
We did have our own apartheid.
We did. In fact, they experimented with apartheid in the White Highlands in Eldoret.
Exactly, right.
But the reason I'm saying that is because then I was saved by my uncle, who was in the University of Nairobi, and he was a comedic actor with the Nairobi University Free Traveling Theatre.
Wow. What is your uncle?
My uncle's name is Jage Gakunju.
Okay.
And he had, in the University of Nairobi, by the time you got to the University of Nairobi, you were then now more about Pan-Africanism and doing things that were more about Africa. And so he was in plays like The Lion and the Jewel by Wole Soyinka, and other plays. But my entry into theatre was Seth Adagala had become the manager or director of the National Theatre.
Right.
And he was putting together a group of people who would do a televised version of a play by Wole Soyinka called The Strong Breed. And in the play, there is a young girl. And my uncle asked my mom, who's his sister, is it okay if we take your daughter to rehearsals and put her in this TV series, televised version of this play? And she said yes. And because she knew that I would be supervised and that I would be chaperoned, she allowed me to be part of the Nairobi University Free Traveling Theatre at the age of 10.
Right. Wow. So so you were traveling around with them?
No. But it was the Nairobi University Free Traveling Theatre that was creating this televised version for Voice of Kenya, which is now known as Kenya Broadcasting Corporation. But at the age of 10, I was riding on the back of his motorbike and going to rehearsals. Okay. And between then and when I actually joined the university, when I was in my late teens, I was in plays at the university.
Regularly
whenever they needed a younger cast member. Wow. And several of my friends and contemporaries were also in plays at the university. But I'm the only one really who carried on into adulthood and post-adulthood. And you continue even now. And continue even now.
Which is really great.
Talking about post-adulthood.
Let's not talk about that. Okay, so what are the skills that you gained? And Mumbi, one of the things that I'm pointing at is your voice. I know you've been told this a lot. You've got the most gorgeous voice. And I remember the first time I heard you and, on stage and, I got to know you, I used to just go, oh my goodness, but I could listen to this woman's voice forever. she could be reading nothing, and and I'd love to hear, how did that what are the skills you gained, and how did your voice become this voice?
I have absolutely no idea. It's
you must make it up then.
Well, lots of cigarettes. I'm not actually sure. I think there is a tendency to infantilize ourselves as women.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that one of the things that I'm distinctly aware of
Mm-hmm.
is how women will sometimes speak as if they're children.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, this is so wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not trying to disparage anybody, but it was always something that made me think, if I make my voice, if I change the cadence of my voice even when I speak
Mm-hmm.
in ordinary spaces, then I found, I was in spaces where, as you know, I worked for the United Nations, and in spaces like the United Nations, you tended to feel as if you didn't really have a voice as a woman.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very male space. It's a very patriarchal space. It's a very, how can I get my next promotion space?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that maybe subconsciously, because you're in the room and you're in the room representing, I want to say all women.
Mm-hmm. You always are, yes.
You always are.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe subconsciously, I realized that perhaps to speak in a more, in a way that denotes clarity and precision is an important asset or an important way to present oneself to the world.
Right.
And I'm actually making this up as I go along because I have no idea where it came from. But I'm just thinking, because I've recently sort of started sharing my work and having people ask me, where does the work come from and how did it happen?
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that would be the way that I would describe what happened, but it was really on a subconscious level. Hindsight is 2020 vision.
Right. No, and
so
when you're living it, you're just living it. And then very often I go back and realize I did 1, 2, 3 things because of this situation, or to get a certain result, or to project myself in a certain way because the environment required it.
Growing up and becoming an actor, there weren't very many role models. But I do remember that when I was 14, I had a moment that I recall. I'm a real hamster when it comes to holding on to programs and ticket stubs and posters and things that I've been in, but also things that other people have been in, and newspaper clippings. And I was talking, because I've been creating this new YouTube channel where I'm sharing a historical perspective of my work and how I feel the history of the arts in this region have evolved. I was looking at a program of a play called Majangwa.
Yes.
Majangwa was written by Robert Serumaga.
Yes, yes.
And watching Anwa Jogo perform the part of, I forget what the name of the woman with his name was Emesu. I can't Joseph or Joshua Emesu. He was from Uganda.
Right.
And watching them on stage.
Yes.
I remember at 14 thinking to myself, this is what I want to do.
Oh my, okay.
But not knowing that it was a job that could be done. I just knew that, and for the longest time I was acting as, outside of a 9-to-5 job before I made the switch to become a full-time actor.
Right.
But that was a seminal moment, that watching Anne and Joshua Emesu performing. And when I was saying before that I was saved by being able to be in these African performances, I think the University of Nairobi was really the only space where Africans were performing work by Africans.
And you know that is such an interesting conversation issue, because human beings are interesting. You know, our minds are global. You know, the human mind is global. It can do all sorts of things. However, we also can become very limited, and we also can exist in silos. So just because there's a Meryl Streep out there doing all those marvelous things doesn't mean that you as an African 14-year-old look at her and think, oh, I can do that too. You actually need people in your environment who look like you, who have the same struggles, etc., for you to doing that thing, for you to think, I can do that. So a role model is not a neutral thing. A role model has to be somebody you can relate with, somebody who looks like you.
Yeah, I think in the words of Viola Davis, because, you know, we're global creatures and we see people speaking to us, I think that's what they mean when they say representation matters.
Exactly,
When they show young children watching somebody be an athlete, and the athlete is a person of color, I think that's what they mean. But I'd never seen it in our context until you just said it now. I'd never seen that actually. I wanted the blonde hair very much.
Yes. Paula, you can't have it. Well, you can. These days you can.
Throw
You
my
can have the
head
wig
over like this, and I wanted to be able to put it behind my ear.
Tuck the hair behind your ear.
Mine, not something that I added. But I didn't until I saw people who looked like me performing, particularly theater, because that's always been my love. I didn't know that I could be in theater, or that I could build what I built, because what I built is a style of theater and a way of performing that doesn't say you can't show your back to the audience. It doesn't say you can't sing or dance because this is a play. It's not a musical. It's not, you know, all of those
conventions, Western conventions
that are like rules that you can't join the audience, or you can't, you know, all of these things that I do. I didn't know that I was allowed to do them
until you saw somebody doing those things who you recognized. It's so interesting. At 14, I decided to be an environmentalist.
Wow.
Because the teacher walked in and said, blah, 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 environment. And then when Wangari Maathai, the late Wangari Maathai, who won the Nobel Prize for her environmental work, when I was growing up, was like a beacon. I was like, oh my goodness, I can do that. So it's doable. It's, you know, you can see somebody, it's been done. You know, millions of people have done these things, but has a person from where you come from done them? So I wanted us to move on to talk about now the highlights of your, particularly your, you know, in your early days, the highlights. And I know that your career continues and is going in all sorts of interesting ways. So we know the story is not over. But if you could just talk about some of the highlights of the work that you've done.
I feel that this is a question that's best answered by people who have watched the work. But I think that one of the highlights is meeting Janet Young.
Okay.
Janet Young is a Gambian director who worked in Kenya for many years before she went back to her country, the Gambia. And because I worked with her, I again, it was what you're saying, and there's all these popcorn little things that are going off in my head, and I'm thinking to myself, that's why I'm a director, because I was able to see Janet being a director when I was a young woman. But she was doing some really amazing work, and one of the pieces that I watched was Tambourines to Glory, which is a Langston Hughes musical.
An African-American Langston Hughes, wow. Yeah.
Very, very beautiful. And I can't remember very much about it, but I remember the stage was full of people. And I'd never seen such a large number of people on a stage before. And I guess, much, much later, then I was able to tap into having seen that to do some of the work that I later did. But working with Janet meant that we were always working on material that was from West Africa, from Central Africa, from Southern Africa. There wasn't much writing going on in Kenya that uplifted women or uplifted human beings. It was all very much about, what I called blanket plays. Old man with a blanket. And my daughter, you have come from America. What have you brought us? You have brought a man. And then there's anger and, sort of like, I don't know, for some reason, a lot of our plays were always about, reprimanding. and I really, it didn't appeal to me. But having worked with Janet and having worked on plays like Aikin and Agnes of God, and for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow was enough, it meant that there was a celebratory way in which theatre was introduced to me, and the stuff that I did as an actor, directed by others, was always very much an uplifting sort of moment. So when I came to having celebrated what I felt was 40 years from that 10-year-old experience of being in The Strong Breed by Wole Soyinka, I was turning 50, and I was feeling uncelebrated, and I said, I'm going to celebrate myself.
Excellent.
And so what I did is I created a 2.5 year long retrospective of my work, and I went back to work that I had done as an actor and directed it and also performed it. So I redid Death and the Maiden.
I was there I was there in the audience. Yes.
And I redid for colored girls.
And it was also at an interesting time because the country was also changing. The country had gotten rid of their dictator of 24 years, and there was this sense of incredible possibility, and I still remember watching Death and the Maiden, because that was like a production immediately after, in 2003, wasn't it?
No, actually, we did the show while Moi was in power.
Oh, he hadn't left. He wasn't quite left yet.
Let me say that again.
Oh, okay.
We did the play while our dictator was in power.
Okay.
In 1993, and there were special branch policemen in the audience. And it was a very nerve-wracking, but I wasn't directing, I was just performing. And what's wonderful about being a performer is that you don't have to worry about any of the stuff that's happening on the production side and backstage and who's asking questions at the box office. You're just ready to just perform. Then we did the play again in 2002.
Yes, 2002.
For the Truth and Justice, TJRC. Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission.
Yes.
They were bringing a whole lot of people into Kenya who had Truth and Justice and Reconciliation Commissions. So the South Africans came, the Liberians came, and people from other parts of the world where this process had happened. and they asked us to perform the play again. Transparency International commissioned us to do the play again for the delegates of that conference, and maybe that's the one.
That's the one I saw. Yeah, and that is that just brings us to such an interesting point here, where we're talking about performing and creating in a regime that literally was threatening you, and people disappeared on the basis of plays and things they wrote, and then now in a freer world, in the post dictator world, what was it like? I mean, the courage that it took. We mustn't skim over that. Yeah. If you could talk about that.
I can't say that I knew that I was being brave, because I think as an artist, I have things I want to say, and I'm saying them, and sometimes you're self-censoring.
Yes.
So, for instance, a lot of the plays that were being done around that time in the 1980s, in 1985, for instance, I remember that there was a International Women's Conference in Nairobi, and we did a play called Three Suitors, One Husband by F. Oyonombia, who's from Cameroon. I can't believe I remember these things.
I know, I'm looking at you like, wow, I'm impressed. Your memory is great.
I'm so glad I can honor these people because, their names need to be in the room.
Right.
And so few people maybe remember that there are these wonderful pieces of theatre. Anyway, that play has a witch doctor, and usually that witch doctor was played by a man. And in this particular rendition of the play, I played the witch doctor. I had a great time.
Wow.
And I don't know whether it was because the director, Odengo Howie, decided, because it was the International Women's Conference, that he would feminize the role of the witch doctor, since there are witch doctors who are both male and female. But when we did that play, I think if I look at the plays that you're saying that, were being done in a time of uncertainty, that was around the time Goge wa Thiong'o went into exile.
Right.
Around the same time that Michere Mugo went into exile.
Yes.
And others. Lecturers who were lecturing at the University of Nairobi. I didn't do literature. I did languages. But again, it's that idea that you don't know that you can be an artist. And so even I was being drawn into it despite myself.
Right.
So I was doing the languages. I thought I was going to be the head of the OAU. I was learning Arabic.
I was going to be the head of the UN, so here we are.
I was learning
the others are lucky we changed,
I was learning French and Arabic at university, and because I had English, I thought that was all I needed in order to be the head of the OAU. And so, but then I was still doing the acting on the side and being drawn, almost growing into myself.
Right.
In a way.
Right.
But there was a lot of self-censorship because of the running away and going into exile of those who were writing the material that would have questioned and satirized and poked fun at our leaders. There was a lot more. That was around the time that there was a lot more comedy.
Right.
But I was never drawn to comedy. I always used to say that comedy is actually harder than the stuff that I do, which is like the more like serious or more political, you might say. I think that it was a difficult time. One of the things that I'm very well known for is the vagina monologues. I did the first production of the vagina monologues in Kenya, and then tried to do a similar production in Uganda and got banned.
Right.
But I think what the difference between 2001 and 2002, or 2002 and 2003, which was the end of the dictatorial rule and the beginning of what they called a new dispensation.
Yeah, and the second liberation. Of Kenya.
The second liberation of Kenya meant that in 2001, when I had wanted to do, Eve Ensler had come to Kenya. She had tried to talk to people about doing that show in Kenya, and it was a complete no way.
Exactly.
And in 2003, it was completely possible.
Right. Isn't it amazing?
And it was, I remember, because I had never done activism.
Yes.
That was actually my first piece of work that you could call theater activism, because we did it as a call to end violence against women.
Right.
And there were a lot of spurious remarks that were being made, but, you know, the misogynists will always make those remarks.
Yes.
But it's a very, very strong call for women to be powerful.
Right.
In ways that we still need to have those conversations even today.
Yes.
But I was talking with women's groups, and they were saying, we've made so many we have come so far, but we can't do that play right now because in Parliament they will just destroy us.
Right.
They will talk about us as if that's all we're thinking about.
Right. Because
the play has a reputation for being about sex and being about, but it's actually about women's power.
Right.
So when in 2003 we were then able to do it, it was a completely different feeling because there were females in government now. There were
there was many more women in government for the first time. Women. Yeah.
And so some of these things we don't realize it until we look back.
Right.
And discuss in a space such as this one.
Right.
You realize that actually these movements, they're everywhere.
Yes.
And they're influencing everything.
Right.
So it's not that I did something on my own, or these women did something on their own, or these men did something on their own, but it's almost like there's a vibration underground.
Right.
That then means that when you look, you realize actually there's so many of us.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Let us stop there with that image, which I think is so powerful, that we're all part of an underground movement that is coming up and creating the moment that we're having today.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
We mustn't what is the word I'm looking for?
Despair?
And we mustn't despair.
Exactly. I agree with you. Thank you.